Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and explore the fascinating, completely multidimensional phenomenon of how and why we age. It's something every single one of us is experiencing right at this very second, yet the actual mechanics behind it, they are incredibly complex. So today, we're going to focus strictly on the core theories that attempt to decode this entire process.
It really is a universal puzzle, isn't it? Why exactly do we age? Well, experts generally agree that no single theory can completely solve it. Instead, what you're going to see today is that aging is widely believed to be a dynamic combination of our internal genetic programming colliding with the random environmental events we encounter over a lifetime. To start things off, we really need to wrap our heads around a fundamental concept: senescence. Basically, this is the change in our behavior and physical makeup that eventually leads to a decreased power of survival and adjustment over time. And what's truly mind-bending about the field of gerontology is that they view aging as a total process that begins, get this, at the exact moment of conception.
To truly grasp this topic, we're going to look through three distinct lenses today. Number one, biological theories focusing on the body. Number two, sociological theories examining society. And number three, psychological theories exploring the mind.
Kicking things off with lens number one, biological theories, focusing on the body. So, biologists generally fall into two main camps here. On one side, you have stochastic theories, which suggest that aging happens simply because random events and damage accumulate in our bodies over time. Conversely, you have non-stochastic theories, which argue that aging is a predetermined, carefully timed phenomenon. The big debate really boils down to this: are we like a machine experiencing random wear and tear, or are we operating on a strict, pre-programmed biological clock?
Looking at the random or stochastic side, damage can happen in a bunch of different ways. It might be transcription errors in our DNA, or environmental free radicals completely damaging our cell membranes. It could even be cross-linkage, where protein waste just sort of clogs up our normal metabolic activities. There's also the famous wear and tear theory, though it's definitely worth noting that this one is heavily refuted today by the simple fact that exercise actually makes older adults more functional, not less. We don't just wear out from use like an old pair of shoes.
On the flip side, the non-stochastic or clock side, we have the programmed theory. This is largely based on the Hayflick limit, which comes from laboratory experiments done back in 1961 on fetal cells. The idea here is that our life expectations are pre-programmed within a very specific, finite range, mostly because our cells can only reproduce and recycle themselves a strictly limited number of times before they just stop.
But what's really fascinating right now is the emerging biological research. We're moving way beyond those basic theories to look at things like neuroendocrine control. For example, how the sharp decline in hormones like melatonin after puberty affects our biological rhythms. We're looking into metabolic theory, where rodent research actually shows caloric restriction can dramatically increase lifespan and delay disease. And crucially, DNA-related research has uncovered telomeres. These are literal caps at the ends of our chromosomes that keep them from randomly clumping together. It's an absolute game changer for understanding the mechanics of how long we live.
Moving right along to lens number two, sociological theories, looking at society.
The sociological view of aging has actually had a pretty beautiful evolution over the decades. Back in the 1960s, the focus was, frankly, quite grim. It was all about losses and how older people adapt to losing things. But by the 70s, sociologists started zooming out to look at broader global, societal, and structural factors. And then by the 80s and 90s, the focus evolved again into understanding complex interrelationships, essentially how an older person fits into and interacts with their environment. And the absolute most crucial point here is how our thinking shifted. Back in 1961, there was this disengagement theory proposing that aging involved a mutual withdrawal between older adults and society. Thankfully, that is no longer supported at all. We completely abandoned that idea and replaced it with activity theory. This is the understanding that maintaining activity is absolutely necessary for life satisfaction. The core assumption? It's pretty simple. It is better to be active than inactive, and it's definitely better to be happy than unhappy.
Building right on that need for activity, continuity theory reminds us that our fundamental personalities, habits, and preferences, they don't just magically vanish when we hit a certain age. Old age isn't some isolated, separate phase of life. It's a continuation. How a person has been throughout their entire life is exactly how that person will continue to be. But of course, society doesn't just stand still around us, right? The person-environment fit theory highlights that we all have individual competencies, things like ego strength, motor skills, cognitive capacity. As we age, these competencies might change, which directly alters our ability to interrelate with our environment. We have to constantly balance our internal health with external factors, and that has massive, massive implications in today's incredibly fast-paced, tech-driven world.
And that brings us to our third and final lens, psychological theories, exploring the mind.
Think about Abraham Maslow's famous hierarchy of human needs for a second. The ultimate goal of life is to achieve self-actualization, right? Having met all your lower-level needs to become your fully realized self. Yet, remarkably, only about 1% of us become truly, ideally self-actualized persons in our later years. Just 1%. That is a wild statistic.
Carl Jung took this psychological exploration a step further with his theory of individualism. He viewed aging not as some sort of decline, but as a profound opportunity. Jung believed that as an individual ages, they are highly capable of transforming into a more spiritual being. For him, self-realization wasn't just a nice bonus, it was the literal ultimate goal of personality development in later life.
Then we have Erik Erikson, who viewed the entire course of life as a series of crises that we absolutely have to resolve. In middle adulthood, the crisis is generativity, meaning contributing to the world, versus self-absorption or stagnation. But when we hit older adulthood, from 65 to death, that final crisis becomes ego integrity versus despair. It's a pretty stark fork in the road.
I really want you to let this quote from Erikson sink in, because it perfectly highlights the severe psychological stakes of failing to find that integrity. If someone remains self-absorbed or just fails to resolve that final life crisis, they risk falling into deep despair, literally viewing their entire life as just a series of misfortunes, disappointments, and failures. That is an incredibly heavy psychological burden to carry.
So how on earth do we avoid that despair? Well, back in 1987, Baltz has proposed a highly practical three-step strategy called selective optimization with compensation to help individuals manage the inevitable loss of some functions over time. First, selection, consciously restricting your life to fewer but more manageable domains. Second, optimization, intentionally engaging in behaviors that deeply enrich those specific areas. And third, compensation, developing clever, alternative adaptations when the old ways of doing things just don't work anymore. All right, let's pull all of this together. Synthesis, the holistic process of aging. The big takeaway from this explainer today should be that aging isn't just one single thing. It's a rich, incredibly complex mosaic. Any one theory on its own is entirely insufficient. To really understand aging, we have to look through all three of these lenses simultaneously. It's the dynamic interplay of our biological clocks ticking down, the random environmental damage we accumulate, how actively we choose to engage with society, and our deep, internal psychological quest for self-actualization.
Which brings us to the very end of our explainer today. I'm going to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought to ponder as you consider the trajectory of your own life. How are you preparing for your own biological, sociological, and psychological journey into aging? Because remember, this process isn't just something waiting in the future, it's happening right now. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and keep learning.